My name is Bob Orr. I'm the Dean of the School of Public Policy, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the University of Maryland. To just give you one point of context for this Climate Action 2016 forum that we will have here today at the University of Maryland, just in December, the Paris Agreement was agreed by an unprecedented number of heads of state meeting in one place at one time in Paris, France. Just 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, a historic number of countries signed that agreement. And the ratification process is underway, already 15 countries having deposited their instruments of ratification. We are on track to set a world record pace on an issue that has not been known for that in the past. This forum today is linked to the Climate Action 2016 Summit happening in Washington, D.C. Tomorrow and Friday. But it's only appropriate that we start the ball rolling here at an institution of higher learning, where we are bringing together practitioners, business, civil society, media, and all of those of you in the academic community who have been working on these issues. I would like to begin by thanking the Brody family that has supported this forum here today. The late Norman Brody and his wife Florence, their son Bill, and his wife Susan and daughter Deirdre have enthusiastically supported this forum today. Their family foundation likes to focus on the big issues of the day, and they're not afraid, quote unquote, they're not afraid of controversy. What I'm very happy to say is that on climate change, we're moving out of controversial debates to debates about how fast and how far we can move, and I think we'll see that today. So thank you sincerely to the Brody family, Bill and Susan. The partners in the Climate Action 2016 Summit include the Secretary General of the UN as a co-host, the President of the World Bank, the CEO of the Global Environment Facility, the two largest business associations focused on climate change issues, the Rockefeller Foundation, and the University of Maryland, the only academic institution in the co-hosts of this major global summit that will be taking place over the next 3 days. We are proud of that, but it would not have been possible if it weren't for the leadership of our president. Wallace Lowe has been leading on sustainability issues on this campus from day one since he arrived. Wallace will introduce our keynote speaker this morning, Senator Ben Cardin, our own senator from the great state of Maryland. But I think it's appropriate before President Lowe introduces Senator Cardin to just say we would not have been able to organize this forum today, or quite frankly, the entire summit, if it weren't for the leadership of our president, Wallace Lowe. Dr. Lowe, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone. And Bob, thank you very much for your introduction. You are extremely generous. Without Bob Orr, Dean of our School of Public Policy, former Undersecretary at the United Nations in charge of climate change, as the right-hand person of the Secretary General, this forum would not have happened. Thank you to you and to your staff for your leadership. And this is a very, very special moment for this university. Let me just say this. One of the things I've learned from my great provost is that when you have an ambitious vision and an urgent vision without an action plan, that's hallucination. And so we have a vision for a climate-reliant economy. And the clock is ticking. We may reach a tipping point where the effects are irreversible. This is a call for action, and governments cannot do it on their own. It requires the involvement of all of us, from business, from finance, from civil society, and yes, from academia. And especially, I'm so glad to see a number of students who have set their alarm clocks and are here this morning. Because you are the ones who are going to help reverse that trend. You have to live in this world long after many of us are gone. So the reason we're doing this as a university is not only because we do research, we have to translate that research in ways that make an impact and that policymakers, both at the national level, local level, and at the global level, understand and can apply. So it's not just about research, it's about translation of that research. Moreover, it's about mobilizing the entire university. It's not just the climate scientists and the policy experts, the wonks. It is also sociology. It is engineering. It is the social sciences. Because quite simply, if we are going to reach the ambitious target that was set below 2 degrees Celsius, given the intended contributions of the different countries right now, we are falling short. And therefore, we have to mobilize the entire university. In fact, we have to help transform society and the economy. And I can think of no higher responsibility of those of us in the university than to imbue our whole curriculum, regardless of the subject matter, an understanding and a commitment to doing what needs to be done. And it begins right here on this campus. It means exposing all 38,000 students to the urgency of this issue, to make sure that these, the future citizens and leaders of our country, and of course the students in universities around the world, play a leadership role in making it happen. So let me just conclude by saying this. The great hockey player, Wayne Gretzky, once said that when asked why he was so successful as a hockey player, he says, "I don't skate to where the puck is. I skate to where the puck is going to be." The world right now is based upon a fossil fuel economy. But the world, where the world needs to go, is towards a reliant and a climate-reliant economy. And that is the call of action for all of us. Thank you very much for coming. I want to give a special welcome and thanks to our colleagues from Universitas 21. We're a proud member of that group. The research leaders are here, and also so many outstanding scientists who, many of them are members of the IFCC. I know you had a work group yesterday. Thank you for being here today. Have a wonderful conference. Our first keynote speaker is Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland. He is a ranking member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, a senior member of the Committee on Environment and Public Works. We all know him as a great champion for climate change implementation. He has been the leader in the restoration of Chesapeake Bay. And of course, he was a member of the congressional delegation that went to the Paris Accords meetings. Senator Cardin, thank you for being here today.
Dr. Lowe, thank you very much, and thank you very much for your leadership. Let me first start by saying I am a proud Maryland senator because of the work at the University of Maryland College Park. You couldn't have a better venue for the Climate Action 2016 Forum than being right here at College Park. The extraordinary leadership under Dr. Lowe of this campus on so many issues. But let me just underscore on climate change, what this campus has done. Dean Orr talked about the fact that they have a sustainability initiative, that this campus has a climate action plan to reduce its carbon footprint, and has reviewed it, and is implementing it, and is accomplishing its objectives as an institution, which all of us need to do. Its research is cutting edge in so many different areas, done right here at College Park. But what it's doing on clean energy is helping our nation in leadership on clean energy. What it's doing on low temperature solid oxide fuel cells. I don't know what that is, but I hear it's pretty good for climate change. What it's doing on the solid state lithium ion batteries. What it is doing in regards to its National Center on Smart Growth Research and Education. And I do know about the work being done there. Smart growth. Maryland is in the leadership because of the work done here at College Park. And I am very familiar with the work done at College Park, the work done in the University of Maryland system on the impact that climate is having on our efforts to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. So I'm a very proud senator, along with Senator Mikulski, because we represent a state that is in the leadership on the climate issues. It's good to be here with Nancy Kopp, our state treasurer, and I thank her for her leadership in our state and working to make sure that Maryland continues its leadership. It's great to be here. When this part of the history is written about those who step forward to bring this issue to the forefront, Senator Tim Wirth will be at the top of that list. It's great to be here with Senator Tim Wirth. And he was a great friend when I was in the House of Representatives and continues his work on behalf of the environment. So let me just share with you some comments. We talked about the work being done here at the University of Maryland on the impact of climate on the Chesapeake Bay. I spent a lot of time on the Chesapeake Bay because it's critically important to the state I represent, to our region and nation. It's a national treasure. And it's hurting. And we're doing a lot to try to make sure it's available for future generations because of the impact it has on our environment, the variety of species, the largest estuary in our hemisphere, the impact it has on our economy, $1 trillion to our economy, but the impact it has on our way of life. And there are many things that we have to deal with, but climate change affects so much of the health of the bay. It affects seagrasses because of the warmer waters, which are critically important for juvenile crabs to hide so they can survive and become delicious. It's very important for our shorelines that are disappearing. And whether you are the Naval Academy trying to protect your property, or you live on Smith Island wondering whether it's going to be there a decade from now, it's a critical issue. So climate change affects all communities from Maryland around the world, and you all understand that. But as President Lowe pointed out, I've taken on a new responsibility as the senior Democrat, ranking Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So I want to talk a little bit about climate diplomacy. We know that communities around the world are in danger because of climate change. I recently visited 2 different areas of the world. First, in the southern part of Africa. For those who are familiar with the southern part of Africa, they have 2 seasons, the dry season and the wet season, the rain season. For the last 2 years, they've had 1 season, the dry season. And as I was looking at the landscape from a helicopter, flying over lakes that had no water, and seeing that wildlife who could not survive because of the drought, and recognizing it's affecting their ability to have sustainable agriculture. And then I was in the Middle East and saw the impact of climate change in the Middle East. We spent a lot of time on foreign policy recognizing our national security very much depends upon stable regimes. Our toolkit for national security involves our soldiers and our weapons, but it also involves our diplomacy and our development assistance. And yes, we spent a lot of your resources to try to keep countries stable so that we don't have to use our military and we can have a peaceful world. The funds we spend in development assistance are being challenged because of what is happening on sustainability of agriculture due to climate change and extreme weather conditions. And we're finding climate refugees. We know the impact refugees have on stability. We see that in conflict areas. We have the largest number of displaced people since World War II, 60 million. It affects the neighboring countries. It affects all of us. And climate refugees will make those challenges even more severe. So this is a matter of national security. As President Lowe pointed out, I participated in COP21 in Paris. I want to congratulate President Obama and our team for achieving something that few of us thought was possible a year ago. We've been through these climate meetings, and we've had high expectations, and they have not been realized. Because President Obama was able to work with world leaders to say, look, we've got to look at a realistic framework that can politically be achievable. That's our responsibility. What can we get done? Because it's urgent that we have a pragmatic way, but an achievable way that will bring about real change on the trajectory that we're on. 196 nations. What an achievement. Every major emitter of greenhouse gases are part of the solution, as it should be. Incredible progress. We all know that we need to do more. We all understand that. But we also understand this is an incredible accomplishment, get 196 nations together. So I've heard, how's Congress going to respond to this? After all, we hear about the comments made by leaders in the Congress of the United States. What will Congress do about it? Well, let me tell you about the support in the Congress to make sure that America does what it needs to continue our leadership. I took 10 United States senators to Paris on a less than 48-hour visit to make a clear statement of our support for the agenda in Paris. That's 10% of the Senate in one place in Europe at one time, which is unprecedented. You know how many members of Congress showed up in Paris to say that the United States wouldn't support this? Zero. Zero. Every week in the United States Senate, when we're in session, every week, a group of senators meet. It could be as many as 20, to try to develop strategies to move the agenda forward on dealing with climate change. Every week in the Democratic caucus, Tim, every week, Leader Reid gives us time to report on what we're doing on climate change. The intensity of the support in Congress may not have the numbers every time, but our intensity will make sure that the United States carries out its commitment on climate change. We are committed to that because it's urgent. We understand how urgent this is. And there's so many reasons. As I was telling, we were talking before we got up here, this isn't a heavy lift. Secretary Moniz in Paris showed us the new technologies. I got to sit in a car manufactured by a 3D printer. It was amazing. We're going to create more jobs as a result of dealing with climate change. It's going to be good for our economy. This is not a heavy lift. It's the right thing to do for our environment. It's the right thing to do for our economy. Judge us by actions in Congress. The American public overwhelmingly supports our efforts to continue to be a leader on climate issues. From environmentalists to business leaders, they support the U.S. leadership on dealing with climate change. The omnibus appropriation bill that passed last year extended the renewable energy tax credits, which will have a major impact on our ability to advance renewable energy sources. And it allowed the administration to contribute to the climate fund. And efforts that were made to attach what we call negative environmental riders on the omnibus appropriation bill all failed. Judge us by our actions. And our actions have been supporting the president in his leadership to bring together 196 nations. The United States will do its job in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And as I said earlier, we've got to do more. Congressman Delaney and I have started an initiative known as the 50 by 30, which is to say that we should be producing at least 50% of our electricity in America by non-carbon sources by 2030. That's achievable. That's achievable. So we intend, this is the beginning, not the end, but a very, very important beginning. It was, I think, significant that the agreement was signed on Earth Day. Gaylord Nelson established the tradition of Earth Day, another one of my former colleagues. And I think it was important because although we come from different countries, we all are part of one community known as Earth. And we all have this responsibility. Climate change knows no border. The impact knows no border. We have to work on this together. While we were in Paris, we met with Vice President Gore, and he said something that I think really hit home should hit home to all of us, hit home to those that were in attendance. He says, when we are the first generation to feel the impact of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it. We see every day the impact of climate change. And the good news is that we can do something about it. The bad news is we may be the last generation that can do something about it. So the urgency is there. It is part of our national security. There's no question about it. We have seen that over and over again. U.S. leadership is desperately needed. U.S. leadership can make a huge difference. It can make the world a better world for our environment. It can make the world a better world for economic growth, and it can make the world a safer world. There is no country that is immune. When I look out and see students getting up at this time, I mean, I have close to a college-age grandchild, and to get her out of bed at this time in the morning would have been impossible. So when I see a room that is crowded like this, and I see people who I know have been great leaders on it, I want to acknowledge Josh Klein, who's here, who is the Senate Foreign Relations person, solely dedicated to deal with climate change issues, because we see this as one of our top priorities in diplomacy and in foreign policy objectives. And I look out and see the people who have dedicated your lives and your time to getting this right, because you know the impact it has on our country and the world. It gives me a sense of optimism concerning our future. And for those of you who live in Maryland, I am proud to represent you in the United States Senate. Thank you all very much.
I love to see anyone get excited about climate change. I especially like to see our senator get very excited about climate change. Thank you, Senator Cardin, for your leadership. You took that delegation to Paris, and the 10 of you made a huge difference in telling the world the American Congress, the Senate, will protect this agreement. Thank you for your leadership on that. It is my great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker. Former Senator Tim Wirth, as Senator Cardin acknowledged, is the recognized leader in the Senate and in the House of Representatives during his time there. He was elected first to the House in 1974 and to the Senate in 1986. In his time in both the House and the Senate, Senator Wirth was the visible leader on environmental issues and especially on climate issues. He attended the first Earth Summit in 1992 in Rio, and he has been a leader on these issues from the beginning. One quick story that I wanted to tell about Senator Wirth, he's a serial entrepreneur. He was the founding Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs. And with that title, Global Affairs, someone once asked me, what does that mean? It means the whole globe. That was Tim. He was the person thinking about the whole globe and pushing it into policy debates during the Clinton administration that moved us forward. Then he became the founding president of the UN Foundation and gave concreteness to Ted Turner's vision of $1 billion gift to save the planet from various ills. Tim put climate change in the center of the UN Foundation, and its work goes on to this day, leading cutting-edge, catalyzing business, civil society, government into this space. But I want to introduce Tim with one last personal anecdote. I have used Senator Wirth as a mentor throughout my career. And there was one time I was interviewed by him for a job. I doubt he even remembers this. I had been chosen as a White House fellow, and we had to go around and kind of a beauty contest to see who we could work for. And I tried to convince him that I was just environmental enough to come work for him at the State Department. But in his wisdom, he decided that a naval officer was a better choice. And I talked with that naval officer about 2 weeks ago. That naval officer, who at the time said, I don't know why Senator Wirth chose me to work for him. I'm probably the least environmental guy in our entire class. He is now, Tim, he's out in Hawaii, and he is leading the resilience efforts of the U.S. Navy throughout the Pacific. So you have changed macro policy, you have set the vision, you've also changed very individual lives. Senator Tim Wirth.
Well, thank you all very much, and good morning to you. President Lowe, it's a real pleasure to be here. I live in Boulder, Colorado, in the shadow of the University of Colorado, where I can tell you that the football is not nearly as good as it is here, but the skiing's a hell of a lot better. But both very fine institutions and great work together on climate scholarship. Senator Cardin and I are old pals from a lot of politics and a lot of years, and I have enormous respect for him, and it's great to see him assuming more and more responsibility in the Senate. And I would like to, again, recognize Nancy Kopp, the treasurer of the state. She and I have been working together for the last decade or more on an investor network attempting to encourage investments from lots of investor groups, retirement funds, and now increasingly Wall Street's raw money into solving climate problems. So Nancy, thank you very much. You've been a real tiger in all of that. Our president, Cathy Calvin, is here somewhere, president of the UN Foundation. Cathy is around and about, and we appreciate her good work. Bob I have known for 30 years, and he is, I would call, the practitioner's practitioner. He is a really great, steady public policy hand, and I'm sure a very good teacher. So Bob, thank you for asking me to be with you. What I want to do today is to speak to the student population in particular. As Bob suggested in his introduction, I've been in politics most of my life. The political side of public policy is ever fascinating as well as constantly puzzling. How did we get where we are today? Why did a handful of founding fathers, including 3 from Maryland, write such remarkable roadmaps for this country? How did we get so wound up around the axle and have to fight a terrible civil war? How can we explain that in our otherwise brilliant founding documents, slaves only counted as partial people? And why is the scar of slavery continued to fester today. These are political issues. How do we get together to solve our problems? Who gives in and who's willing to compromise? How do we reach solutions that we think that we hope are going to be less than the lowest common denominator? Some people are very gifted politicians and leaders. Senator Paul Sarbanes, your recent senator, Ben Cardin, of course, Barbara Mikulski, who I was in the House with and in the Senate with. They have made and continue to make a huge difference. They are politicians. They are critical to the ebb and flow of daily life. Their decisions are difficult, intricate, and fascinating as they strive to help solve some of our deepest and most pressing problems. On top of that list today are two existential issues. By that I mean issues that are absolutely key to our very existence. The control of nuclear weaponry to keep from blowing ourselves off the face of the globe, and the stabilization of our globe's climate. How to assure that temperatures don't rise so much, sea levels don't rise disastrously, and oceans don't become so acidified that they can't support the food chain necessary for man's survival. These two issues, nuclear weaponry and climate change, are your issues, the issues of the next generation and the generation after them. They are and will be the signal issues of your time, and they're closely interrelated. If nuclear weapons are used, the radiation produced goes up into the atmosphere and moves in a destructive swath around the globe. Once started, it cannot be stopped. If carbon saturates the atmosphere, temperatures will rise, the tundra melts, ocean circulation changes, these feedback loops will increase the heat, and it cannot be stopped either. These two great existential issues, nuclear and climate, are issues of the atmosphere, of this thin layer that surrounds Earth, makes life possible, and is remarkably fragile. This is a climate conference, so I will focus, as I should, on climate politics and policy. But always keep in mind the larger context of our survival and our future. Most of us have had a good overview of the academic perspective on climate action. The science of climate change should drive what we do, should define the urgency of action, should be a natural bridge for all the constituencies who have to get together. But unfortunately, the science by itself is not enough. If it were, we would not be so far behind and have so much of urgency in the future. After all, the science of climate change has been well understood for more than 30 years. In the early 1980s, countries of the world came together and first documented the issue. The Senate had its first major climate hearing in 1988. The Rio Conference on the Environment met in 1992. We've known for a long time that the climate challenge loomed large, that we were dumping millions of tons of carbon, loading it up as if the atmosphere was a garbage dump. And we've seen global temperatures start to rise, while seas are lapping relentlessly higher and higher on our shores, and the acidification of the oceans increases, already to dangerous levels. But until very recently, the world could not get together to agree on what to do. The industrial North feared the damaging economies, while the South accurately protested that even though they were not responsible for the growing atmospheric pollution, they were suffering the most. Fossil energy industries blocked action by impugning scientific work, by buying political outcomes, and by casting doubt on the reality of climate issues. Huge countries in the global South cried that it was their turn to develop fossil fuel-based economies and chafed at the prospect of any control on their carbon production. Small island states, nearly 25% of the membership of the UN, watched with alarm as the survival of their countries was threatened as never before in their history. Despite the goodwill of dozens of conferences, scientific gatherings, economic analyses, and arresting narratives, for the longest time the world seemed stuck, unable to agree, unable to act, unable to address the survival challenge, which is climate. But after all this time, and after years, threads of optimism seem to flow together. People's business executives, politicians, religious leaders began to drop their guard. And the valiant and frustrated efforts last year of many of the NGOs, all of this somehow, the momentum changed. In Paris last December, as the President has pointed out, as has Bob Orr, the countries of the world came together and forged the first agreement across nations, North-South, rich-poor, urban-rural, Muslim, Catholic, Hindu, and all the rest. Agreement was reached, miraculous and exciting. What happened? For the purposes of today's discussion, we need to understand, to learn from, and respect what came out of Paris. What happened was the confluence of an amazing series of political agreements, people coming together in different ways, voicing their concerns and listening to others, and then concluding that they finally could agree. I'll give you a few examples. The US and China agreement, the two biggest economies and the two greatest polluters who had watched each other with enormous suspicion for a decade or more. UN leadership, which only had the weaponry of political and moral suasion, the only institution that could argue for global legitimacy and frame the global issues. That was the UN's contribution. In September, the great march down 6th Avenue in New York. Many of you were probably there. Hundreds of thousands of Americans from all walks of life protesting and demonstrating for their future. Pope Francis, a singular and nearly revolutionary leader, gently speaking to his flock and through them to everyone all over the world. And dogged negotiators, spending an enormous amount of time working in great detail, trying ideas, searching for common ground. Bob Orr has been one of them, one of the toughest jobs in the world. All played a major role, and the agreement was the first and global agreement to recognize and control greenhouse forcing gases, to protect the atmosphere, and to save life as we know it on the only planet that we know. As a general proposition, political acts have been disparaged and belittled, but should not be. For the US and for China, this followed again years and years and years of homework. Very difficult for the US to come to agreement. People wanted to say the Chinese aren't doing it, why should we? They're going to take advantage of us, why should we? And it became a very, very nasty undertow for all of the discussions. And we were not alone. The Chinese had exactly the same reactions, although it was the mirror image. Why should we restrict ourselves? They developed, we haven't. We have a huge underdevelopment problem. We have our share of fossil fuels we have to be able to use. They had a different perspective. They were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, producing more and more carbon, and we were number 2 at carbon production. The two of them got together and built an understanding and built common ground. John Podesta, for example, now the chairman of Secretary Clinton's campaign, was the chief person in the White House driving this agreement with dozens of meetings between the US and China. Again, the hard work of politics. In the United Nations, that awkward but essential coalition of nations of the world, so hard to bring together, but with great political leadership by Ban Ki-moon, the quiet and totally committed Secretary General, and his team were able to hold people together, bring them along, and quietly make them feel comfortable about the role that they had to play. The non-governmental world, which had been trying for 30 years, not giving up, strongly holding the line against those who wanted to slide backwards while broadening their own constituencies. Pope Francis, whom I mentioned, criticized for political acts by some of the most conservative side of the Catholic Church, but arguing that nothing was more essential than the preservation of God's creation. The Pope brought together leading scientists from around the world, including a number of Nobel laureates, forging a remarkable encyclical, a teaching about the earth and our responsibilities as stewards. The stubborn and often faceless negotiators from our own State Department and elsewhere, who endured the pejorative of bureaucrat, but soldiered on effectively and very successfully. And of course, Al Gore, blaring the trumpet for climate action while he took about as many slings and arrows as any person could possibly stand, a clear demonstration of the importance of political persistence and leadership. These were all, in their own ways, political acts. These were people and institutions from all over the globe, from every walk of life, from every belief system, coming together to reach agreement, determined to succeed together. Over time, chasms of policy and economic differences looked like they could never be bridged. But the politics of necessity, the urgency of the science, and the fire of hope won out. The Paris Agreement provides a roadmap for our globe's future. Everyone's going to have to follow it. There is no cop on the beat to enforce it. The agreement itself, each nation has to develop its own plan and report back on how it plans to sharply reduce its carbon footprint. This will not be easy. Outliers and deniers still lurk in the ambiguities of the agreement, ready to unleash their lawyers to try to water down the agreement. While much of the energy industry recognizes the imperative of sharp reductions in fossil fuel use, some major players continue to drag their feet and to slow everything down. Some countries will decide that this isn't such a good deal after all, and will want to withdraw and hide from the realities of the climate challenge. And in this presidential race, stark differences will be articulated by those who have not read or do not choose to read the science, and those who understand the imperative of soldiering on to help build, not destroy, the Paris momentum. Anything big, like the climate challenge, and nothing is bigger. Give me water. No. All right. Anything big, like the climate challenge, and nothing is bigger, requires continuing engagement, patience, persistence, and stick-to-itiveness. In other words, this will require not our best political skills. As we leave here this morning, let's remember that every little step counts. The complete challenge is huge and demands each do our own part. For universities and other endowments to examine their investment policies, to put themselves on the path toward a very low-carbon economy. For Wall Street to develop the innovative investment vehicles that will facilitate the trillions of dollars that will be needed for our economic transition. For the big energy companies whose business models must evolve in order to fuel and suggest this changing economy. For government and regulatory institutions to change the rules so that new energy technologies and new economic entrants can thrive and not be smothered by the status quo. Every individual and every institution has a role and must play it if we are to survive. This is a call for good public policy, and this is a call for sound and visionary politics. Not politics as a dirty word, but politics in its best sense, bringing us together. Thank you. Bringing us together, joining to solve our problems, and being part of building for a better future. So let me close by thanking you for inviting me, and let me leave by urging you to join up. Volunteer, join a political campaign, protest for divestiture, support your favorite climate cause, run for public office. This challenge is your generation's challenge, so pick it up. You will find it to be fascinating, absorbing, and more worthy than anything else of your energy and talents. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. In your ever-generous way, you called out all those people who have inspired, and your description of Al Gore could also be applied to you. Thank you. Our final speaker of this opening session is a scientist, an astronaut, and I would say a leader. While I've known Tim Wirth for decades, I've known Piers Sellers for about an hour. Maybe an hour and 30 minutes. Dr. Sellers is the acting director of the Earth Sciences Division at NASA Goddard. We have a lot of great scientists in this neighborhood, a lot of great scientists on this campus at NASA Goddard and around this area of College Park. Dr. Sellers is also, literally, a rocket man. He's an astronaut. He was the project scientist on the first large Earth observing system platform, Terra, launched in 1998. And he's gone to the International Space Station not once, but 3 times in 2002, 2006, and 2010. But why do I call Dr. Sellers a leader? He has taken those experiences and the vision as a scientist, but also the vision as an astronaut who has had that unique opportunity to look down at our Earth. And he has transformed that into that precious commodity, insight. We desperately crave insight in this fight. We have to inspire. We have to change individual human behavior, institutional behavior, national behavior. And the reason that I say I am inspired by Dr. Sellers was not because of all of his amazing scientific work, because of his amazing work as an astronaut. I resolved when I opened my New York Times a few short months ago that there was someone I had to meet. Dr. Sellers wrote an article called Cancer and Climate Change. For those of you who haven't seen it, you should. Dr. Sellers has reduced into one article a perspective that I think every human being on the planet needs to have. So when we invited Dr. Sellers here, one of my students told me, "Wow, he's a rock star." Well, rock star and leader, scientist and astronaut, Piers Sellers.
Well, thanks for the very kind words. I generally peak in the first hour of knowing somebody, so it's probably past my best. Huge thanks to Dr. Lowe, University of Maryland, for pulling all this together, and the invitation, for the opportunity to talk, and for breakfast, eggs Benedict on a crab cake, revolutionary. It was really, really good. So straight into it, because I know we're short of time. So I've worked for NASA directly or indirectly for about 34 years. My son says this is due to an appalling lack of imagination. Climate scientist, astronaut, bureaucrat. When one got too hard, I moved on to the next. The secret of doing all these different things, of course, is to do them all badly. But I learned a lot from doing these 3 different jobs, and they are actually linked. And I'll tell you how. So as a climate scientist for about 17 years, I thought about how the world works, how the Earth system works. It was a deeply satisfying and intriguing pastime. I got a lot of insight out of it, but it was mainly an intellectual exercise, but I loved it. I was an astronaut for 15 years. I was a spacewalker. I saw the planet with my own eyes, going at 5 miles a second, once around the world every 100 minutes, 250 miles up. You can see 1,200 miles in every direction. It's a really good place to see the Earth from. The curve of the Earth, blue horizon, very, very thin atmosphere. So what did that give me? I got a personal experience on top of the intellectual understanding. I really understood, how the world is actually put together. We're all sitting on this little ball, and I learned to love this planet and its inhabitants in a way I didn't before. It's a bit like leaving home when your irritating family suddenly looks awfully good once you've left it behind. Now, as a bureaucrat, which is what I've been doing for the last 5 years, and it's actually a lot more fun than it sounds, I'm working hard to get scientists the resources they need to push our understanding that much further, to extend the reach of our models and our observations, to give all you guys, politicians and the public, the information you need to know. So I don't tell the public and policymakers what to think or what to do. My job is to make sure they get the facts and a full explanation of what the theory tells us about how the future could look. That's my job. And surprisingly, I like this job a lot, and hence my son's comments. I want to talk about 4 things very briefly. 1, what do we know about climate change right now? 2, what do we think will happen? 3, who cares and why bother? And 4, what are we humans going to get ourselves out of this trouble? What are we doing to get ourselves out of this pickle? And is it enough? So 1, what do you know about climate change? The facts are very straightforward. We've burnt 500 gigatons of fossil fuel since 1750. That's given us a 1 degree centigrade rise. It's very obvious. The Earth's lower atmosphere has warmed significantly. 2015 was the warmest year on record. 2014 before that, 2013 before that. We're on the upslope, guys. January, February, March, the warmest months on record of those months. Okay, so what else do we know? Thanks to satellites, which is where I work, we've seen that the stratosphere is cooling. That's expected from our global models. As the lower atmosphere warms and traps more heat, less heat gets into the stratosphere cools. So it's a signal that our theories are correct, and the rate is about what we predicted. The late summer Arctic sea ice has shrunk by 11% per decade over the period 1979 to 2015. So it's almost half what it was in 79. Not quite, almost half what it was. So maybe after the middle of the century, you could kayak over the top of the world. There will be an ice-free Arctic Ocean, very likely. The Greenland ice sheet is losing about 300 gigatons of ice per year. Now, a gigaton of ice is a big cube of ice 1 kilometer on a side. 300 gigatons just slide off Greenland into the ocean. So global sea level rise, we're measuring that with an altimeter from space, a laser. Okay, you can actually see to within a couple of millimeters, the height of the oceans. That's risen by 3 inches over the period 1993 to 2015, 75 centimeters. Now, interestingly, 2/3 of this rise is due to the ocean getting warmer and fatter. As you heat things up, they get fatter. And the other 1/3 is ice melt off the land. We expect the ice melt contribution to really take off over the next few decades, and we may have sea level rise on the order of 2, 3, 4 feet by the end of the century. All right, so all this stuff, all these observations are entirely consistent. They are facts, not made up. The Earth is warming, the ice is melting, the sea is rising. All consistent. So what do we think is going to happen? It's entirely up to us. We've burnt 500 gigatons so far since 1750. If we burn another 500 gigatons, we'll hit the 2 degree centigrade bar. I think it's going to be a tough thing to do, to pull off, to actually make that goal. But we've got to really try hard. Our models are very consistent on this, and they're based on theory, and I'm going to talk more about theory in a minute. And I'm gratified that the COP21 agreement and those decisions that came after it are based on science and based on this solid theory. So that's gratifying as a scientist to see public and policymakers taking note of scientific evidence. Now, I get in trouble when I'm talking to deniers, always, about theory and the role of theory. But the theory behind climate models and climate model predictions is as solid as the law of aerodynamics. So all those deniers out there, I tell them, if they don't like theory, they shouldn't get on an aeroplane. It's way too dangerous. because a modern jet airplane is just aluminum wrapped around a theory. Okay? Now, the 2-degree centigrade world that we're trying to get to, and talking to these technological friends of mine and economists and politicians, they really are doing their best to try and achieve that. It's probably a manageable future. We could expect bad effects, droughts, pressure on food, pressure on water, all around the world. Hundreds of millions of people will be affected, but it's probably manageable. Right now, we're seeing early indications of that. The Eastern Mediterranean, by the way, 18 out of 19 global models in the last assessment predicted that the Mediterranean basin and the Oklahoma Dust Bowl will become very, very dry indeed in the mid-century. Okay, the Dust Bowl would come back, basically. Right now, the Eastern Mediterranean is experiencing the worst drought in 900 years. And a number of assessments have said that was a significant stressor leading to the Syrian civil war, and also in the region, Darfur crisis. So, climate stress is bad news. Now, a 3-degree centigrade or 4 degrees centigrade world, what would happen if we just kept burning the coal as is, and the gas and the oil, it's much, much worse. It's not 100 millions of people, it's 2 to 3 billion people out of 9 billion. It's a lot. That is combined with the fact that our models get more uncertain the further we go away from the 2 degree centigrade limit. They become more uncertain at 3 degrees. At 4 degrees, they become very uncertain. There's more room for really nasty surprises out there. Changes in the ocean circulation, stuff like that. So not only is it more dangerous, but it's more dangerous in ways that we cannot anticipate. We want to avoid this. So a 4 degree or 3 degree centigrade world would have problems that I don't think are manageable within our current civilized constraints. It would be bad. So it'd be very prudent to stay within the zone where we think we have some certainty, that's 2 degrees centigrade, or close to, besides being more manageable. All right, very quickly, who cares and why bother? 2 previous speakers have talked about this. There's lots of world leaders care, and I've got 2 examples. Who find themselves usually on the opposite side of the fence, but in this case, they see things the same way. Here's the Pope in the Vatican. So religious leaders are in the business of giving us a vision of the world that we should strive to achieve, the world we would like to see. That's their job, all right? Now, full disclosure, I'm not a religious man, all right? Some people say that I have pagan tendencies, but that notwithstanding, I read all 189 pages of the encyclical. Pope made 2 very important points, moral points, I think. He said, first of all, the responsibility for us leaving an inhabitable planet to future generations is entirely up to us, because they're not here yet. It's on us. That resonates. Second point, the burden of climate change will be felt most deeply by the world's poorest. They don't have the resources to deal with either, and it's deeply unfair from their point of view because they didn't cause this mess. So it's another reason for conflict. Second example, that's the Pope. Second example, the US military was busy too in 2014. They wrote an assessment of the impacts of climate change. Now, unlike the Pope, the military has to deal with the world as it is or is likely to become. So they have a different job description. But written in there, it says 2 things that I really liked. One was, climate change is already a significant stress in regions that are already stricken by poverty and inequity. They're already conflict prone. Resource scarcity will lead to radicalism and violence. This is soldiers talking. And then a Marine general, 3-star, says about certainty, because he was reading all about this business of uncertainty and deniers saying all our models are uncertain. And he says, well, speaking as a soldier, you never have 100% certainty about anything. And if you waited till you had 100% certainty, something very nasty is going to happen to you on the battlefield. So the military, who's in the business of risk management, say you shouldn't push your luck too far, and I agree. So we have 2 groups, Vatican and the military, of responsible, thoughtful, conservative leaders. And they see this problem the same way, and they've drawn exactly the same conclusions. And that should be something that's noteworthy. All right, lastly, what are we humans doing to get ourselves out of trouble? Well, I think the COP21 treaty, the agreement and the treaty that's going to be signed, is a triumph. It's a fantastic start. Obviously, we need to do a lot more than what's written in the agreement to keep within the 2 degrees centigrade limit. But I am very optimistic. And why is that? Well, with the ozone hole in sort of 2000 timeframe, we had another global crisis, and science made recommendations to policymakers, which were carried out. And the very first one of those agreements was called the Montreal Protocol. Some of you guys might remember it. And you think, well, that solved the problem. It did not. It solved 15% of the problem. It took 6 more follow-up agreements to finish the job. And basically now, the ozone hole is on track to be sort of pretty much repaired by 2100. We've seen an uptick in the amount of ozone. So it's not, you shouldn't be discouraged that COP21 doesn't answer all the questions. It's an incredibly good start and a great precedent. Lots of follow-up work to do. Keep us all employed. Am I hopeful? Yeah, I am. I'm very hopeful. I think we humans have fought our way out of very tough corners in the past, and we've done it repeatedly. And the survivors of all these challenges who survived to become all of your ancestors, by the way, they tended to be realistic, they tended to be practical and flexible. And they recognized threats, and they dealt with them as they came along. The losers in history, on the other hand, tended to be in denial of whatever threat was extant at the time. And that's proven to be a very poor approach. Whether your primate of choice, one of us, is dealing with a cave bear 10,000 years ago, or fascism 70 years ago, or climate change right now, denial does not work. You have to deal with a realistic situation you're confronted with. And all of you people here are doing that. So I'm betting on us humans actually doing the right thing. I think we can sort this out if we get on it quickly. But we're going to have to work fast, and we're going to have to work smart. So for all you young people out there, this will be your planet soon. All right? Our generation, the geezers, we should be doing everything possible to hand it over to you in working condition with the keys. Please keep reminding us, the older generation, that that is our duty to you. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sellers. Pagan tendencies and all. I can see why my students are inspired by you. Thank you. With that, we conclude our opening session. 3 amazing leaders, 3 amazing sets of remarks to orient us. We have a very full day ahead, 21 sessions before the end of the day when we will close here. I would encourage you all to move expeditiously to your first sessions. We are running a little behind, so let's give everyone that time. Thank you very much to our opening speakers and to the Brody family.